Hello, everyone. Today we will walk through how to submit a wage report using the XML Extensible Markup Language file format. XML files are plain text files that use tags to structure the data within them. We will be using the source code editor, Notepad++, to create our XML file. XML files are comprised of elements listed on the lines within the file. Most elements will contain a beginning tag indicating the start of the element and an ending tag that indicates its end. Some of the elements will indicate a value for a specific field, while others will be used to indicate a section of the file. While elements containing field information will feature beginning and ending tags within the same line, sections can start and stop on distinct lines. This is done by having a parent element that comes before and after the lines of the information it describes. Parent elements exist in the wage file to indicate the start and end of the wage file, employer record, and the employee record. To help us build the file, we will reference the XML format instructions available in the Employer and TPA Resources section of MyUI University. We will keep these instructions on the left side of our screen so we can follow along as we go. Before we begin, note that the XML is a variable length file, meaning the fields may not take up the maximum allowed length depending on the data you need to include. All right, let's begin. Starting at the first line, we will enter the XML header. This tells the system what XML version is being used. Afterwards, we will include the beginning tag to inform the system that the file is a wage file. Within the wage file is the tag indicating that we are beginning the employer record. Under the employer record, we will indicate the reporting period we are reporting for with a 4-digit year and a 2-digit quarter. The quarter should reflect the last month of the reporting period. So quarter 1 is represented by 03, quarter 2 is represented by 06, quarter 3 by 09, and quarter 4 by 12. So for quarter 1 of 2026, we will input 202603. We will now enter the employer account number or EAN assigned to you by the state of Michigan. Even though the data field for EAN supports a max character length of 7 characters, you do not need to enter 7 characters if your EAN is shorter. Do not attempt to add spaces or zeros to arrive at the maximum number of characters. Please note that this number is distinct from your FEIN or MIN. Next, we will add the apportionment program indicator. We will enter a Y if the employer has the apportionment program indicator activated, and an N if the employer has the apportionment program indicator deactivated. If the employer wishes to request apportionment for the first quarter taxes, the apportionment program indicator will need to be activated. If the field is left blank, MyUI will interpret this response as an N. Now we will indicate whether or not this is the employer's final wage report they will have because they are terminating or inactivating their business. We will enter Y if yes and N if no. If this field is left blank, MyUI will interpret this response as an N. Now we will begin typing the employee elements. All employees for an employer should be within the employer record. We will do our first employee record now. To start, we will once again enter the employer account number or EAN for the employer. Now we will enter the 3-digit reporting unit number to identify the employee's work site. This number is also known as the location account. For single unit employers, you will enter 000. We will then once again enter the quarter we are submitting for. Remember, this should match the quarter for the employer that we selected earlier. Now we will add elements to indicate whether the employee worked for the employer during the pay period that included the 12th day of each month in this quarter. If yes, we will enter 1 for that month. If no, we will enter 0. Now let's go ahead and enter the Social Security number or SSN for the employee. Do not include any hyphens when entering this. Leave the section blank without spaces if you do not yet have the employee's Social Security number. Note that a missing SSN will result in a non-fatal error being applied for the record. You will need to correct this in a timely fashion or penalties may be assessed. Next, let's add fields for the employee's last name, first name, and middle initial. Note that blanks are acceptable for all 3 fields, and there is a 30-character maximum for first names and last names. If the first name or last name exceeds those character limits, please enter as many characters as you can up to the limit. Please note that leaving the first name or last name blank while allowed will result in a non-fatal error and may result in penalties being applied to your account if not corrected in a timely fashion. Now we will enter the total UI gross wages paid to the employee during this period. Cents must be included with the decimal, but we cannot include any commas. Note that there are a maximum of 12 characters before the decimal and 2 after the decimal that can be included. If there are no cents, add decimal point 00 in the wage total. The next element will capture wages subject to the additional obligation tax when it is triggered for the state of Michigan. Since the obligation assessment is not currently triggered, we will enter a 0 decimal point 00 here. Now we will enter out-of-state wages if there are out-of-state wages that were paid and credit is being requested. This field allows for a maximum of 12 characters before the decimal and 2 after. Once again, commas are not allowed. If there are no out-of-state wages, we can leave this field blank. For this employee, there are no out-of-state wages. However, our next employee will have out-of-state wages to report. Now we will enter the 2-character code for the state related to the out-of-state wages. This field can also be left blank if not needed. Now we can enter the visa wage indicator to indicate whether there are wages paid for foreign workers to report. This will only be required for when an obligations tax is in effect. Y is entered if visa wages are active, while N is entered if visa wages are not active. The system will interpret blanks as an N. Let's now enter the seasonal indicator, which indicates whether the employee worked during the pay period that included seasonal wages during this reporting period. A Y will be entered if yes, and a N will be entered if no. Please note that seasonal employment is not automatic. A seasonal employer must apply for seasonal designation by UIA at least 20 days before the season starts. Given our employer does not have an approved seasonal designation, we will enter N. Now we will indicate whether the employee is an owner or officer of the business, once again entering a Y if yes or an N if no. The system will interpret a blank here as an N. Next, we will enter the proper adjustment code for the employee record. A code of 0 means that this is an original filing. A code of 1 means that this is an adjustment because of incorrectly reported wages. A blank field will be treated as a 0 if this is an original filing, or as a 1 for an adjustment. For a description for all adjustment codes, review the file format instructions on MyUI University. Now that this employee record has been completed, we can add the end tag for this employee. To add another employee, we will begin with a new employee tag. We will once again enter the employer account number for the employer. Now we will enter the 3-digit reporting unit number to identify the employee's worksite. We will once again enter the quarter. Remember that this should match the quarter for the employee and employer listed above. Now we will add markers to indicate whether the employee worked for the employer during the pay period that included the 12th day of each month. We will include a 0 for the last month to indicate that this individual was not an employee at the time. Next, we will enter the Social Security number or SSN for the employee, remembering not to include any hyphens. Now we will add fields for the employee's last name, first name, and middle initial. Remember that blanks are acceptable for all 3 fields, and there is a 30-character maximum for first names and last names. Now we will enter the total UI gross wages paid to the employee during this period. Next, if the obligation assessment is active, this is where we would enter the obligation tax gross wages. Because the assessment is not currently active, we will enter 0.00 in this field again. Next, we will enter out-of-state wages for the employee. This time, we do have out-of-state wages to report, so we will enter it here. Now we will enter the two-character code for the state related to the out-of-state wages. For this employee, we will enter OH for Ohio. Now we will enter the status to indicate whether there are foreign worker wages to report and visa wage is active. As a reminder, this will only be required when the obligation tax is in effect. The system will interpret this field as an N if left blank. Once again, we will enter an N here. Now we will list whether this employee worked during the pay period that included seasonal wages during the reporting period. As a reminder, a blank response is interpreted as an N. Once again, we will enter an N here since the employer does not have an approved seasonal designation. Now we will list out the owner and officer status for the employee. Again, entering an N to indicate that they are not an owner or officer of the business. Like the previous field, the system will interpret blanks here as an N. Next, we will enter the proper adjustment code for the employee. In this scenario, we will use a code of 10 to indicate we are submitting out-of-state wages. Now that this employee has been completed, we can add the N tag for this employee. Now that this employer record has been completed, we can also add the N tag for the employer as well. Finally, we can close out the wage file altogether by entering the wage file N tag. Congratulations! We are now ready to submit our XML file.